Hello, BookTube. Well, it's the end of October, and that means that on BookTube there's a rash of October wrap-up videos and November TBRs uh, that are subtly influenced by some of the events going on in November. November is nonfiction November, of course. November is also Tome Topple, the next 2 week iteration of Tome Topple. And November is also NaNoWriMo, which I'm going to be talking about on this channel in just a bit. Uh, but in addition to that, people are making just general monthly TBRs. And those of you who've been watching this channel will know that it doesn't exactly work for me. The number of books that I'm going to read in November uh, is rather high. it's uh, it's I'm going to go for a personal record, and we'll see if I reach it. Because of that, there's absolutely no way that I could do a TBR for the month. It's not like I'm picking 10 books and that I can tell you about them. And I don't even know all the books that I will read. A large part of it will depend on what comes over my plate that I don't know about. But so what I do on this channel instead is not a TBR, but a TBR BY, to be read by you, where I recommend 10 books that are coming out in the month of November. Uh, some of these are not strict on sales, so they might be out already. That I can honestly recommend to you, and once again I'm trying to keep it sort of broad based across subject areas rather than just bombard you with Roman military history. And excuse me, the closer we get to uh, the holiday season, the more I'm starting to think about, recommendations for you to get for other people, or for other people to get for you. But anyway, I wanted to show you, I have the trusty iPad here. I wanted to show you the covers of these things and talk about them a little. And the first one is science and technology, which is a fun subject for me just because I'm so out of my depth in it. This is Brian Deere, and it is The Friendly Orange Glow. And it's the story of the Plato computer network that was originated by a bunch of teenagers and 20 somethings a long time ago, long before the internet, connecting one computer to the next and literally trailblazing the world of the web that we know today, which is a fascinating subject on its own. And starting the book, I was worried that the author would think, well, it's a fascinating subject on its own, so you don't really need me to do much heavy lifting here. But I didn't need to worry. He's a fantastic companion for the whole subject. He's a fantastic narrative historian. So I highly recommend it for you computer geeks out there, or for anybody you know who might be one. Although I'm not a computer geek, and I loved it. Then we're going to do, because this is my channel, we're going to do, because it's nonfiction November that we're looking at, we're going to do a raft of big fat biographies. I love big fat biographies. I argue with them. I compare them to all of their predecessors. I annotate the heck out of them. And they end up being, of course, my favorite reading experiences almost always in any given year. And this year has had some really great biographies. So I want to show you just three of them. The first one is Victor Sebestyen. This is his big biography of Lenin. That's what the cover looks like. No title, or no author, no blurbs, no nothing. Just that. Just a propaganda poster and his name. And it's terrific. I love this author, but this is just a terrific book. Uh, Brutal, realistic, grounded in the real world. It doesn't take any easy answers for or against its monstrous subject. Just tells it, the story afresh, and I love that. Actually, that all three of these biographies have that in common, because the next one is a subject who is so prone to biographer storytelling that I was expecting that and nothing else, and instead I got a genuine look at a genuine person, and that's Franklin Roosevelt: A Political Life by Robert Dallek, who's a really good historian and biographer anyway. And in this book, he knocks it out of the park. This is a fantastic FDR biography, and FDR, it has been the subject of a great many biographies by serious historians that weren't fantastic because they were constantly trying to worship this guy that meant the world to their parents. That's not how you do biography, and I was very happy that it happens only a little bit in this book. The Dallek doesn't look as coldly as he could at FDR's, at the quasi legal nature of a lot of FDR's attempts to bully the federal government. He doesn't look as hard as he could at some of FDR's less enlightened political stances, like setting up a sting operation to ensnare homosexual members of the armed services. And he doesn't look like all of the biographers. He doesn't look harshly enough at FDR's affairs, but 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 he still does look harshly at those things, just not, in my opinion, harshly enough. And the rest of it, the political maneuverings with Congress and the people, amazingly good, just amazingly good. You're going to see this thing stacked on your Barnes and Nobles front new release tables, and it's a good one to get. And the next one is where have we got here? The next one is also a presidential biography. It's also a huge presidential biography, and I went into it not expecting much, because the subject was covered brilliantly about 50 years ago in a book that I honestly didn't think could be topped, and it's this. It's Robert Mary's President McKinley, a big fat biography of President McKinley, who most Americans know almost nothing about. If you were to tell an average American that you were reading a big fat biography of uh, 20th, a modern day, a 20th century, essentially a 20th century American president who started a war, massively federalized the United States financial system, and was assassinated in office, they'd have no idea who you were talking about. They would think you were making up a president, like if you were doing a Hollywood movie. McKinley was the subject of a book 50 years ago called In the Days of McKinley, which was beautiful, a fantastic book. You'll see it moldering at a yard sale, and you should grab it right away, because the writing is just electrically good, smart and densely intelligent. I loved that book so much that I thought a new biography of McKinley would only disappoint. But Robert Mary does a fantastic job in this book, better in a lot of ways than In the Days of McKinley, and he really goes into it with an agenda, which would ordinarily torpedo it from me as a book, but much less as a recommendation. But his agenda in this case is born out of his research. It doesn't shape his research. His research came first, and the agenda is to show that this was a great president, and that we would be much more aware of that fact if he hadn't died, if he hadn't been killed. Then we might be much surer of his legacy. So, if you have a presidential biography buff on your gift list, or if you yourself want to know more about this president, who Mary makes an excellent case was more pivotal than we think, what a book. Right there in your bookstore or in your library. What a book. So those are three biographies. Then we're going to shift gears quite a bit to a series that I love. I just love it. I have them all. I've got it since the very first one. It's an oversized art paperback that will not be in the art section of your bookstore. It's almost always, no matter where I find it, it's almost always in the science fiction section, that oversized graphic novel science fiction section of your store. And it's Spectrum, which is all the way up to 24. It's been 24 years of Spectrum, which collects fantasy art from across a huge spectrum of venues and styles, from promotional art to video game art to comic book art to book covers to movie art, and they collect the best of it. They give out awards, and they give you glossy page, full color reproductions of all of this stuff, and it's incredible. Almost all the pictures have stories of their own to tell. There are whole novels condensed into some of these images. I love it. I absolutely love it. I go through it for some of my regular favorites. I go through it to see, what the year's latest bumper crop of Tolkien illustrations are, what the year's latest bumper crop of Edgar Rice Burroughs illustrations are for Tarzan, or especially John Carter of Mars, that sort of thing. And I always like to see which comic book art they pick, which one is going to appeal to the editors. But you might think that sounds very specialized, but taking one of these volumes on your lap and just sort of daydreaming your way through the pages is an amazing reading experience. It really is. And the next one is, I guess we could call it Nature. It's a favorite subject of mine. I think I might have mentioned the book on this channel before. it's a little on the technical side, and it's a little on the inaccessible side as in terms of distribution, and it's a little on the expensive side. But it's really good. It's this: The First Domestication, How Wolves and Humans Co-Evolved, by Raymond Pierotti and Brandy Fogg, and it's a big synthesis of all the latest research and thinking about how canines were domesticated and what that did not only to them but to human society and how it affected everything. And I've read every book on the subject, and every, as far as I know, every major English language scientific study, even if it hasn't been made into a book. So I was very happy to see the huge amount of synthesis that goes on in this book. This is really, in addition to the storytelling ability of the authors, they do a fairly good job when they don't need to. The remit of this book would be satisfied simply by them, intelligently discussing their subject, but they actually know how to tell a story. But the real value of it, in addition to that, is that this is a big triangular yellow sign saying, "You are here. This is the current state of research on the dog-human connection," which I, of course, find fascinating. And if you do too, then it might be worth, for instance, your library will probably have this book, but your bookstore probably will not. So it might be worth, requesting it. It's very good. And then the next one is fantasy. And it's a debut novel, and I don't know if I talked about it on this channel or not, but I loved it. It's by Ruth Emmie Lang, and it's The Beast of Extraordinary Circumstance. And it is a multi-viewpoint novel about people reflecting on and trying to reassemble the biography of the main character, a marvelous, enchanted boy who grows up with unpredictable and sometimes inopportune supernatural powers, and affects everybody around him, especially the woman he loves. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It reminded me a lot in tone, not necessarily in subject matter. It reminded me a lot in tone of Peter S. Beagle, which I don't know how much I've talked about epic fantasy on this channel, but praise doesn't get any higher than that. So if you happen to see this and you're in the mood for a folkloric, winsome kind of alternate fantasy, and you want to boost a debut author's career, it gets 2 thumbs up from Steve. So you can't go wrong with it. And then when we're talking about thumbs up from Steve, there's another one that I have to recommend here. I honestly do recommend it, and it has a very prominent thumbs up from Steve. It's Michael Katz's new translation of Crime and Punishment, which has a blurb on the dust jacket from yours truly, which is the first time that's ever happened to me. I loved it. I have read every English language translation of Crime and Punishment, and all of them have their strengths. The strength of this one is that it captures Crime and Punishment. The way Dostoevsky writes it, it is an absolute cacophony of voices. Yes, there's narrative, but this is a gigantic, overheard, fever conversation of a novel. Overlapping voices, overlapping expostulations all throughout. It has the most voices of any Dostoevsky novel, and of almost any novel that I know. And most translators follow in the tradition of the original 2 or 3 translators into English in trying to tame that. Because on first impulse, it really does look like chaos. But it's not. and to the extent that it looks like chaos, it's meant to look like chaos. And Katz is the first translator that I've read in English who really captures that, who really captures the fact that people are constantly interrupting each other, they're constantly talking at length, sometimes uncontrollably, and always at cross purposes to each other, and that really forms a living part of the book. If you haven't read Crime and Punishment, I wholeheartedly advise that this be the one that you read. It'll be in your bookstores, it'll be in your libraries, because it's new. but also maybe even more so if you have read other translations of Crime and Punishment. Then I highly recommend this one because it's different from any translation that you will have read, and that in itself is fascinating. That's worth the price of admission right there. So that's a classic for us. And then uh, now that we're done with big fat biographies and serious science and classics of literature, we're going to end on a frivolous note with three romances. So if you're not interested in romance, you can stop the video now. Uh, I have three Regency romances that I want to recommend to you. It was a wonderful November is turning out to be a wonderful month for romances of all kinds, not just Regency. But these three all have dukes, and I love them all. So I wanted to recommend them as sort of to end on a nice note. The first one is Grace Burrowes, and it's No Other Duke Will Do, and it's about a Duke who, I don't know if you can see. It's actually a very nice cover. The movement of her drapery suggests motion as she heads towards a manor far in the distance. So she's on a balcony. She's not actually going to walk there. She's not levitating or anything. But I like the cover. It's very thematically similar to the cover of another of the romances that we'll see. But in this one, uh, a young man has newly become a duke, and he's inherited a mess, family estates that are deeply indebted, and he has a long-term plan. He's not actually on the marriage market. He's not a mercenary. He has a long-term plan to use the estate's finances to recover its position. But everybody around him thinks, well, why not go the easy route and just marry someone who's rich? Wouldn't that be so much simpler than your long-term plan? And he sort of grudgingly thinks maybe, but it's so artificial. It's like something out of a Regency novel. And the woman that eventually comes into the ambit of this game would rather be reading. she's 200 years too early for it, but she would be wearing an I'd rather be reading T-shirt. So it's perfect ground for a romance author to take these two and see whether or not she can make love happen, and it's just delightful. And you can see the cover. The next one is very similar. The back of a heroine with an estate in the background, and she's heading towards it, and the drapery is showing her moving towards it. In this case, she's carrying a white bouquet. I'm not sure that the cover artist knows Regency iconography, so but anyway, it doesn't matter. This is A Duke in Shining Armor by Loretta Chase, and this is part of her Difficult Duke series, a series centering on ne'er-do-well dukes who are such problem in society that they're called his disgraces. uh, and the novels all follow a very cut and dried formula where you've got this disreputable, rakish duke who's actually got a heart of gold and only needs redeeming. And I know that's trite, but we don't come to Regency romances for their stunning originality. We come to them for the energy of the storytelling, and this is Loretta Chase does just a wonderful job, just wonderful. But my favorite of Regency romance that I've read so far for November has a quite different kind of cover. This is Maya Rodale's "It's Hard Out Here for a Duke." uh, I had to Google the title. It turns out that it's a pop culture reference that I didn't get at first. But the premise here is our American cousin. The premise here is that a dukedom falls to a distant relative who is an American. He's born and raised in America, so he doesn't know anything about the world that he's entering into, and he has no choice but to do it. And the female companion to the Dowager Duchess of the dukedom that he's inherited has lived there. Oh God, it's the son. That's the last thing I was expecting after the last 10 days here. But she's expecting something quite different from the strapping young buck who shows up. And that, again, is a very predictable premise, but Maya Rodale does such a great job with it. It's so enjoyable. These are three dukish adventures to send us on our way for this November 2017 TBR BY that I highly recommend. I highly recommend all of these books for many different registers, for many different reasons, and also as gifts. And I'm going to wrap that up for now because otherwise I could do one of these every day. So, I love recommending books. I love talking about them. But I'm going to stop for now, and I will be back soon. Thank you, BookTube.